Today we're doing pumpkin empanada, and this will be a precise recipe. I'll have the whiteboard with the recipe written on it later. Right now we're going to do a few preliminary things that has to be done before we get started on the recipe. The recipe calls for a half cup of spiced tea. We need a 1-inch stick of cinnamon. This was a 1-inch stick, but I've already broken it into pieces with my knife a little bit. The recipe calls for a half a cup. So 1 inch of cinnamon stick. It calls for a half a teaspoon of anise seed, and I wanted you to see this. I do have star of anise, and these are some larger pieces of the star of it. And then I also have anise seed. I truly think that this is what it needs, but I'm going to put a little bit of both. The spice in that dough is delicious. It's what makes this whole empanada. It has a licorice flavor. Of all the things in the world that I like everything except licorice candy. But when you have the licorice spice, it's a little different thing, and I can tolerate it. In fact, I like it. And fennel is the same way. The best spaghetti sauce I ever made is when I started adding a little fennel seed to it. But so we're going to put some of this anise seed in there. We're going to put this star anise in there. I'm not going to put this one, I just did it to show you what it looks like. And I'm going to put in a whole clove. So I'm just going to put this on the burner, let it steep for about 4 or 5 minutes. Now, of course, I'm going to need pumpkin, and this was the fresh pumpkin that I cut up from the other day. There's 6 cups of fresh pumpkin in here. The recipe calls for 4 cups, and of course that's mashed, pureed, and ready to go, as if you had just got it out of a can. And you can use canned pumpkin, but because I have this nice, beautiful, fresh pumpkin, I've chunked it, washed it, and put it in a pan, and we're going to start boiling it down. As I've mentioned before, when you're just cooking, you're free to do what you want to do. But when you're baking, that's a different thing. So today we do have a precise recipe for these pumpkin empanadas. You start off with a tea. The tea is a half teaspoon of anise seed and a 1-inch piece of cinnamon. You steep it to make a half a cup of spiced tea. That's going to be the liquid that goes in your dough. The dough is 1 1/4 cups of butter creamed with 1/2 cup of sugar. You mix that with 3 1/2 cups of flour, a half teaspoon of salt, half teaspoon of baking powder. You mix it all together, mix the butter and the flour mixture, mix it together and let it rest for about 20 minutes to let that gluten develop. Then you're going to make it into 1 1/2-inch balls, and you're going to press them and flatten them so that you can fold them over. Then the pumpkin mix is 4 cups of cooked pumpkin, 1 cup of brown sugar, half teaspoon of each cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg, and 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to add a tablespoon of that mixture into the empanada dough, press it over, seal it off, and bake it for about 30 to 40 minutes at a 350-degree oven. And then when it comes out, you can butter it if you want to. You don't have to. Butter it and sprinkle it with cinnamon sugar. So since the dough has to rest for about 20 minutes, we're going to go ahead and get it mixed up. But in the meantime, I want to show you this pumpkin, and they're beginning to cook down now. It's still very, very watery. At this point, you have to be very careful. Keep this stirred or else it might burn on you. The first thing you do is you take 1 1/4 cup of butter. So that's 2 1/2 sticks of butter. The real recipe calls for lard or shortening, but I don't use either one of those. I would either use coconut oil or butter because I want my recipes to be as natural as possible, and there's nothing natural about shortening. I've got a little tip for you. If you save these wrappers, just fold them over on themselves, and the next time you bake a cake or bake biscuits or anything like that where you want to grease your pan, just pick up one of these pieces of paper and rub your pan with that. It's a little bit of a savings trick. 1/2 cup of sugar, and we're going to cream that. Of course, you can do this with a mixer, but because my butter is at room temperature, I don't really have to. The crystals of the sugar helps dig into that butter and makes it creamy. There, we've got our butter and sugar creamed. The next thing we have is 3½ cups of flour. I've put an extra little bit of flour here because later we're going to need flour to put on our cloth when we start rolling these out into the circles. But here I've already mixed the 3½ cups of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. And we're just going to put that all in at once. I've got our flour and butter mixture all mixed up, and so now we need the 1/2 cup of spiced tea. We're just going to sprinkle this spiced tea over the flour a little at a time and toss it with a fork. This is the pie crust method or the biscuit method. The less you work it, the better. Okay, that's my 1/2 cup. But you see, I do have some more over here just in case. You never know exactly when it comes to working with flour because depending on the humidity of your home, you may need a little less or a little more. But that's looking pretty good. We're going to get in there with our hands now and just feel it, see how it does. It's looking just about right. A good dough will clean your bowl out. And that is cleaning that bowl up nicely. We're going to put it over here on my floured linen cloth. You can use linen or cotton and cover it. Let it set for 20 minutes. And look at this pumpkin now. Can you see those holes in there? Looks like little volcano holes because the water is beginning to evaporate out. If you put it in a skillet, there's more room for the evaporation to take place. We're going to measure out 4 cups of it. So there's your 4 cups. And in here we have 1 cup of brown sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. So we're going to put all of that in our pumpkin mixture. And 2 tablespoons of butter. Oh my goodness, this smells so good. My dad came through the kitchen a while ago and he saw me doing all of this preparing. And he saw the whiteboard where it said pumpkin empanadas, and he asked me, how close are we to sample time? So he's already wanting pumpkin empanada, and I can't blame him. You know, I'm not much of a sweet eater. I can pass up cakes and pies, no problem at all. My trigger food is bread or a potato. And except for pumpkin empanada, there's 2 desserts that I will go out of my way to make for myself. All other desserts I make for somebody else. But 2 desserts I make for myself are pumpkin empanadas and orange cranberry scones. And then I got to analyzing it one day, and I think the reason why I like the empanadas and the scones so much is because they're so much more like bread than a cake or a pie. So give me the bread. So here's our dough. We're going to pick it up and divide it out a little bit. And we're supposed to make 1½ inch balls, a little larger than a golf ball. Okay, we got 14. Take one out. Okay, here's our last one. They're kind of like pancakes. The first 2 or 3 don't turn out so good, but the longer you go, the better they get. So this one, being the last one, looks pretty good. And then they go in the oven for about 30-40 minutes. We'll come back when they're done. As it turns out, there is plenty of the pumpkin mix left, but that's not going to go to waste. I'm going to put it in a cake, or like banana bread, or we'll eat it on our toast. It'll still be good. Oh, well, I'm coming in from the living room. I served my dad one. And I said, "What'd you think, Dad?" He said, "Oh, that's good." I said, "Do you want another one?" And he said, "No, that'll do for now." But here's 4 of them. They turned out real nice. And we've got some more over here still cooling. But that's pumpkin empanadas. It was a little bit of trouble, but if you used canned pumpkin, of course that cuts out another step. But these are so worth it. Give them a try. And that's Granny B's recipe. Take it and make it your own. You'll be glad you did.